Yes, you guessed it right. It's the Jetpack Joker from the animated movie Mask of the Phantasm. This is one of the figures that I've wanted to see made for the longest time, and of course, I had to do it myself. There's a lot of steps here. Let's get right into it. This takes actually 4 figures to complete the entire process. Now, in case you haven't seen your Mcfarlane Joker figure, this is what it looks like disassembled. And I actually used also the My Hero Academia, I don't remember which model it was, but it was the figure that has the black outfit, and I disassembled that one as well. The piece that you see here are the pieces now that are leftovers from the Joker body. And the torso itself does have the articulation that you are actually looking for. This is the piece that goes inside the My Hero Academia, and I robbed it of its internal workings to put it into the figure that I need. So this flesh piece on the torso is not going to work out because the neck is too inclined forward and it's too tall, so it makes the neck look more like a goose on the Joker. So I ended up having to use the white one from the actual Joker's body, also because I didn't want to have to paint anything extra. So that made it really convenient that it's actually white. But this is what your Joker figure looks like on the inside. Now, this is the custom head that we're going to use, and this I purchased off of eBay from Action Figure Customs. It is a custom resin printed head, and it's going to work out just fine for this. And this is the torso that we are now using for the Jetpack Joker. It is a black plastic, which we will have to cover in primer to get away from the black plastic overpowering the color. And as you can see, it's a loose fit, so we got to customize that peg to fit on the inside. Now, if you take a look, I'm going to use the gloves from the Joker as well. And this is the idea concept, 1993's Jetpack Joker. Actually, I purchased 3 of these, so I am going to open this one up and sacrifice this one because we're going to use that jetpack. The actual figure, it's going to go in a box. So let's get started with the next step here, which is to figure out what we're going to do in the process. But look at that artwork. That's pretty cool. We're going to get as close as we can to that. No, I didn't add the tie and the flower. I didn't add them in there because they would have to be sculpted, or I would have had to use Worbla to manufacture it from scratch. And besides, they would have got in the way of the harness, or actually the harness would have damaged them after so much use. So I decided not to do so and have a nice clean look. So we're using the torso from the Joker because it's already in white, and we're using the trunks from the My Hero Academia because it's got the accessories already on there and it's molded correctly. Now, in case you're wondering, this is why you lose that mobility on the torso, because this plastic is so thick and then the torso bumps into it. So if you wanted more mobility, just cut the ribs off right here and cut the trunks and you'll have more mobility. And of course the shirt on top reduces that as well. But in essence, that mobility is there on the torso. You just have to get back in there and do some customizing. So let's go on and let me show you what this is going to look like, because there's so much here to share. Some of it is repeat from other videos, but you're going to notice that there are a few other techniques. Now, we're not doing any dry brushing whatsoever. This is going to be strictly airbrushing and a few molded pieces that we are going to work in Worbla, but this is where we want to get to. So although this custom 3D printed head is a great job, well done, it needs a lot of work. And where we need the work is on the back of the head, because it is printed or cut too high. There is no neck on the back of the head. So when it matches up with the peg and the neck, it's not going to work. Really, what we need is a larger head or width of the head so that it will sit over the neck and encompass the neck about a 1/16 at a minimum, so that it looks like it actually sits around that peg on the head. But this one is too small, so we are just gonna build it up in the back to be able to sit it properly on the peg that's in the neck. Now once it dries, then I will modify it a little bit more by sanding and cutting down the areas that I don't need. Now I won't be able to heat this up with a heat gun or a hair dryer just because I could damage the resin head. So the best thing to do is I'm just going to leave it out in the sun because it's nice and warm outside, and that'll do the drying for me. But take a look. See how high the back of the neck is? Well, that's just not going to work. It's got to be plugged in. If it was printed just a little bit lower with its own neck built in and wide enough to encompass this, that would be great. Now I don't want to shave down the neck because then I will have damage done to the plastic. It's really difficult to sand it down and leave it so smooth that it fits inside, and I didn't want to do any other work that was extra. So I went this route. I could have gone the other, but I chose this one. You just have to pick and choose what you want to do on your figure. So we will lose some movement because we are adding putty to an area that needs it, and because it's not wide enough, it's not going to have that full mobility on the head. It will still look up and down and side to side, and it will turn, but it's going to be limited degrees on each side simply because of the putty we're adding to it. I had to build up the putty not just on the neck, but I had to move it up into the hair so that the putty has something to attach to and stays on permanently and adheres well. Otherwise, it could very easily snap at that break line there and it's just going to come apart. Besides, this back of the head is going to be covered up by a helmet, so you don't have to get very neat and tidy on the back of the head. You just want to make sure that putty stays where you put it. You can sand it down, and if you want you can paint it, etc. But as I came to find out when I was working on the helmet, I had to shave down those corners on the hair so that it would fit inside the helmet, and nobody knows. Just because I'm telling you. But nobody's going to know what you did to the hair because that helmet is not going to be coming off. It's going to be part accessory of the figure. So it is time to paint this guy. So I've already primered for video purposes the figure ahead of time, and I mixed in some lilac, or purple if you want to call it. It's a tester's purple, it's a dark purple, and then I added a light gray to bring down the hue on that purple, or lilac if you want to call it. So I added about 3 to 4 layers depending on how it looked, and then I did add some shading with a darker purple coming up from underneath to give it a shadowing, and then from the top with a bit of a highlight. So this is the color that I ended up choosing. I do recommend that you use an airbrush. It is going to be incredibly difficult to achieve a smooth finish with a brush because you could end up with those brush strokes even if you thinned it down enough. And besides, with an airbrush, you're going to get that really clean factory look. It's going to look that much nicer, and it's going to speed up your process because it will also cover it quicker, and it's going to dry as you are working on it because it's in very, very thin layers. So again, because it is acrylic, it's going to take you at least 3 to 4 passes to cover it completely. So if you didn't get it all in the first one, no worries, let it dry for a few minutes, come back, hit it again, and just repeat the process until every crevice is completely painted. Now, as you're reloading your brush to paint some of those other areas that you may have missed, make sure that you do bend those elbows to get in those joints so you can color those areas so that they match the rest of the figure. And again, wait till it dries before you bend it back. Now, definitely use a hair dryer to speed up the process in drying, unless you want to leave it out in area in the environment where it's going to dry. But if you leave it outside because the paint is still wet, it could catch dust, etc., and it's just going to create havoc on finishing up the surface. So it's best to use a hair dryer when possible. That way you end up with a nice clean look. And as you can see, I've already bent these before I even started painting them. So once they're dry, I'll bend them back and give it another 2 coats of paint. Now, don't get overconfident just because you're using an airbrush or if you're hand brushing it. Make sure that that last layer of paint goes on over the last spots you may have missed. So before you start putting it back together or sealing it with your Mr. Super Clear, make sure you cover it again with that last layer to make sure the surface of the figure is completely in the color that you need. So once the epoxy sculpt is completely dry, you can sand it, paint it, do whatever it is you need to do. Remember that the back of the head is not going to show because it's going to be covered by a helmet. But now we have a better, stronger base for that peg to fit into, especially when we're going to be moving the head up and down or left or right. Now it's actually going to stay on there without breaking or just coming loose. It does come off easily because it's not fixed in permanently. And as you can see, I also reshaped the back or the top of the neck so that it fits properly into the head. So you are going to be losing some of the mobility, as you can see here, because we had to add that epoxy at the top. Unfortunately, it's a loss, but it is not a big loss because the way the figure is going to be displayed, you're not going to need that extreme head mobility. As you can see, once you fit it into the actual shirt or in the torso, that neck becomes the proper size. It looks oversized here. So now comes the time to open up that figure from 1993. And yeah, I actually did buy 3 of these at the time. This is actually one of my second pieces. One of them I sold, so I do have another left in package. But we are going to be using the Jetpack. The Joker itself, it's going to go on the shelf. But the actual Jetpack, we are going to have to take apart because we're going to be using it. Now we're going to try to mimic the straps or the harness that's on this figure. Remember, it's a cartoon, so it's not truly accurate. And no, again, I didn't add the bow and I didn't add the flower just because the harness that I used was that much bigger, and it would have been an obstruction or would have damaged the other 2 pieces. So I just decided to have a nice clean look. But this is the inside of the Jetpack, so it's got plenty of room for some electronics. We're gonna have to get rid of these handles here because they're gonna be too small for a 7-inch figure. This is a 5-inch figure. And that clip that goes around the waist, that's gotta go as well. But I'm gonna keep the back plate, that plug, to cover up the work on the inside. This green hose, yeah, it's not doing it for me. It's got to go. Besides, it's just an accessory. I can leave it on the side, but as far as on the backpack, no, because it's going to be causing some weight issues, counterweight issues when it's on a stand. So I'd rather not have it. But we've got plenty of room in here for some wiring, some lights, and the actual battery. Now, you can leave the battery on the inside if you want to have it all enclosed in a self-contained unit. I prefer not to, just because I don't want to have to take it apart again to change out batteries. So it's going to be up to you if you want to cut off this green accessory or if you want to heat it up and pull it through. I ended up heating it and pulling it through. I want to use that space, that gap, to be able to wire my USB connection through there without having to drill out anything else. So it makes for a nice clean look, even though it's going to be exposed. But it's going to look pretty cool, as you saw in the beginning clip. So once again, let's do a little test fit, see how it's going to look. And I love the contrast. We know that clip has got to go. Yeah, it would sit way too low if we use that clip. That's not doing it for me. So let's go on to the next step and modify this backpack so that it works with our Joker. So to modify the backpack, I had to create a harness. Not only because the figure has a harness, it's wearing it, but it needs to attach to the backpack. Now when you're cutting with this rotary cutter and you're actually cutting leather or any other material, make sure you cut in one direction only. If you're cutting up, go in that direction and do not pull the blade back. If you pull the blade back, you're liable to get off track and then you make a second cut where you're not supposed to. So I am using actual leather. I am gluing it down with the E6000 upholstery glue, and I am also going to be using a few little magnets on this harness. This is actually the belt that goes around the waist. This is where I'm going to attach two magnets so that I can attach the harness from the actual jetpack. Why did I go with magnets? Well, because it's easier. They just snap on. Now, the harness that you see here has these rings or these loops. Those are made from electrical wire. Now, it is true that the harness that I made does not match the actual color that's in the drawing. This is the leather that I found, so I used it. It really didn't matter to me. The point was to make the figure. If you want to use a color that is closer to that actual drawing, then by all means do so. It is going to be your figure and it's going to be on your shelf and you're going to enjoy it. The whole point is, in customizing, you can design it to what you need, or you work with what you've got. Now the gray clips that you see on the front and on the back, that is epoxy sculpt, and I did make those aside before putting it on the body and putting the harness together. So I made those in a rectangular format and then cut those. I dried them out in the sun once again, and then I threaded the harness through and looped them together. Now on the side, I actually connected the two loops together using the UV resin, just because it dries so much quicker. So it does change the color of the leather. It actually makes it look black, like it's burnt. So I did have to paint my harness to match the rest of the leather because I didn't want that burnt look. It was just pretty ugly. I could have used something else, but it would have required a longer dry time and I couldn't match the seam that much better. Time to work on the actual jetpack, and I wanted some lights in the actual pipes or exhaust that's coming out, so I had to drill those out. Now when you drill it out, be extremely careful. It is very soft plastic, besides it's old and brittle. And so if you have a hand drill, I would recommend that. With a Dremel, it's going to create a lot of heat and it's going to actually melt the plastic. And that's why I have some holes in here that I actually had to fill up with putty. Now the wire I ran through the top and I had to make a groove in there, so that's why I have the putty on the top. That way the wire runs in an L shape all the way into the exhaust. Now the two fire pieces that I have here, I got that from a different figure. I don't remember what that was, but that's what I used. And I cut down from those accessories and then I put them in here. I glued those in with the UV resin. So I'm testing out my lighting. This is the tiny battery that I actually could house inside the jetpack, but I don't want to have to take it apart to change out batteries. These little batteries will not last very long. Now if you look closely at the harness that's here, I used some jewelry accessories or connectors to clasp onto the leather that I attached to the jetpack, and that's going to clip onto the loops on the harness. And at the bottom you see the little magnets that are going around the waist harness, and that's going to clip in there with those magnets. And there you go. It's pretty simple. The inside is just glued with the hot glue, or you can use the UV resin. So let's take a look at the handles or the controls that are for the backpack, or the jetpack better said. Now the silver ones are obviously too small, so I had to extend them using this spare mic wire from an old connection to a computer. So I left the wire on the inside and I actually used the batons from the Nightwing figure. I just cut them down. I took the grip handles and I glued them into the end of the wire, and then the bottom grip onto the other. Although I ended up removing that tiny piece on the end simply because it was just too tight to fit into the hole where the wire was already there. So I left the wire bare. I ended up painting it green. I did primer the wire because it's black and it was not going to take good in just the green paint. So I had to primer it in gray, and then I painted it a, well, it's not a bright green, but it is a green, and it just looks that much better. So it just gave it a better contrast of color. So on my jetpack, I did not glue in the handles or the controls simply because I want to remove them when I put it into a box or store it, so that it provides a better storage so that it doesn't get damaged if I have to put it into a tight spot. And by the way, I didn't want to glue anything into those wires in case for whatever reason that I may have to do any kind of electrical repair to it. So once again, taking some primer, airbrushing it onto the pipes for the exhaust, and then I went ahead and painted them in a silver. So again, it's going to be determining how much work you want to do to these and how much of the plastic you melted in drilling it and how much epoxy you ended up using to repair some of those holes. I ended up using a lot. So mine doesn't have the greatest finish, and because it's two different materials, it was really difficult to get a nice, even, smooth finish. If I'd used maybe a hand drill, I would have cut down on the melting of that plastic. But at this point, I'm just going to work with what I've got. Could I get another one off of eBay for 12 bucks? I could, but that means I have to start all over again, and I'm already deep into this process, so I'm going to work with what I have. It doesn't look that bad. It's for me, it's for my shelf, but if I was doing it for commission, I would definitely get a different piece and rework the whole unit. So this is what he looks like so far with the lights out. Now we can see the lights on, they're consistent, but I'm still not happy with that unit that's in there. I want the lights to flicker, so I got to change out that board. I kept the backing of the package, the backing board, because I like the artwork, and I may use it to make my own display with him in a box with this as the background. It looks pretty cool. But anyway, this is our preliminary test. Here I've now switched out that board on the inside of the backpack to make the lights flicker. But I wanted to introduce you to Worbla. Worbla is a heat activated material that cosplay users continuously use to make their costumes. You just take a hairdryer or a heat gun if you've got one, and it will then become soft and malleable. It is containing its own adhesive, so it actually will stick to itself or the surface you're adhering to. Here I'm just showing you what I use to mold, and if I leave it on there, it's going to stick to that surface. So if you want to prep it onto a surface like this, you've got to use maybe a Vaseline or some sort of a barrier to keep it from sticking to that surface. Now it does stretch out, and as you can see, if you stretch it too far, then it actually will tear. Personally, I didn't like the brown one. It has too much texture, and it is sandable, it is paintable, but because it's got so much texture, it doesn't work for something that is this small. For something large like a cosplay costume, it works great, but it's just too much texture for something so small. So I ended up having to hand mold it, and it was much better to freehand it than to put it onto a mold like this, because then I didn't have to worry about it sticking to the surface. So I switched over to the white Worbla. Worbla actually comes in white, black, clear, and then the brown that you just saw. I switched to the white because not only does it take the same amount of heat to become malleable, but it dries smooth. There's less texture to it, so it's easier to sand and paint, and it just looks that much better. What you're looking at here, I definitely spent over an hour putting this helmet together. It was my first time working with Worbla, and it was incredibly difficult for being my first time. These are the pliers that I used to manipulate the different areas of it. I didn't want any texture, so I had pliers that were flat on the inside surface to make sure that I could mold it without burning my hands after it was heated with that hairdryer. Like I said, it took me over an hour to do this. This is the final look of it. It is now ready for paint. Let me get you a closer look, because here it looks smooth, and once you're up close, it looks like it's kind of a peach fuzz. But it is ready to paint. You can sand it, you can drill it, and I went ahead and added some paint to make it look like it's a leather helmet. So I had a few washes of brown, and then I finally added some texture using a sponge. Take a look at what came up. So after applying the base coat of brown, I then added a wash. I just want to stain it in a reddish brown. I don't want to repaint the helmet. I only want to stain it with a reddish brown to give it more of a leather look, a rich leather look. Then I'll come back in with a black added to this red brown, and I will add the texture using a sponge. After applying the texture with the sponge, I went ahead and used a brush to paint in the inside, although it's not going to be seen. I just wanted to have a complete and thorough job, and I wanted to make sure I got the edges as well too. I only needed a few coats with that sponge, so it worked out really well on the outside, but it's going to be to your liking. Just go as much as you need to, depending what tones you want to end up with. If you want a whole different color, hey, that's great. It's all up to you. So the final step for the helmet is actually the head. And once again, if you don't have an airbrush, I recommend buying at least a very inexpensive one that just sprays. It doesn't have the control on the trigger, don't worry about it. So long as it sprays a nice, clean air and paint mix, it will give you a really beautiful finish on these portraits. This is the easiest portrait. There's only a few colors and there's really no blending. It's just a white with the yellow eyes, a black pupil, yellow teeth, and a red tongue. Oh yeah, the black hair. Now remember, you don't have to paint the back of the head. If you want to, just be very simple because it's not going to show. It's going to be hidden by the helmet. So anyway, to speed up the process, because there's so many details in this video, here it is all ready to go. Helmet and the face is already painted. And yes, I've already added a clear coat to protect the finished product. So as you can tell, the helmet does have a liner because I wanted a contrast, and I did have to shave down those corners as I mentioned because it was going to be incredibly difficult to fit it into that helmet. Once it's there, guess what? It's not coming off easy, so it's going to stay. And I may pick up a second portrait just because I would like to have an unhelmeted Joker as well. For now, this is what it's going to be. And there's one last thing missing, if you can tell here, and that's the goggles. So that's the next step, getting a set of goggles. So now who am I gonna rob to get those goggles? I could make them, but it's just gonna be that much more time consuming and more work. I think I'm just gonna have to rob Batgirl. So as you can tell, the back of the head does not show. It is covered by the helmet. We do have some posability on the neck and the head. It's minimal, but it's enough to get by with what we need to do here. Now that magnet on the front of the harness, I know some of you are going to say that it's unfinished, it's not ready to show. Well, I just haven't found the one piece that I need. But as of today, as of making this video, I found that I'm going to use a button for one of those iPhone home buttons, and I'm going to put that into that spot. Once it shows up, I'll put it in there. By the way, it just leaves it open for an update video segment. So once I have it ready and set, I will do an update and show you what I finalized on the figure. Like any other artwork, sometimes it's in a continuing process, it's never ending, and it's always changing, so it leaves it open for update videos to follow. In the meantime, let me show you what those goggles are gonna look like on top of this helmet, because that's the only detail that's missing to complete it. It's just gonna look really cool. As you can tell, there's really not a whole lot of room for that bow tie or that flower. It's gonna get crushed or ruined by the harness, so it's best just to leave it clean. Once again, you probably already observed that wire that's coming out from the jetpack. That's a USB connection. The reason again why I have it is because I can just plug it into an external source such as the USB connection on my computer, and at work I can enjoy the figure right at my desk. And I can also plug it into a USB power supply that is rechargeable, and this is what it looks like. So it's very convenient. I don't have to break it open to replace any batteries or buy any batteries. Now this is what the helmet looks like with the goggles that I robbed from Batgirl, and the band that's on the goggles, that's actually a belt from a Mythic Legions figure that I cut down and I put into or glued to the edges of those goggles, and it looks that much better. It just completes the whole look. I really like it. Before I end this video, let me show you the Jetpack one more time, because I switched the control module on the inside because I wanted the flickering lights. And this control module from Light My Bricks, and you can also get it from Brixmax, has 3 different operations on it. One of them is a pulsing light, one of them is a blinking light, and then the other is a rapid fire. So you can actually play with this and change the speed of it so you can get the effect that you want. The other one was just a pulsing light, and it works just fine, but more options is more play value, so I really like this. Now the cap that's on here, that is a piece of popsicle sticks that I glued together, and that just covered with a craft paper, and I attached it in there. It's removable so I can get to the inside if I ever need to, but it's ready. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you liked the information I shared with you this time. I'm going to leave you with video without all the lettering so you can enjoy the figure and a few actual images in here. And again, if you like it, share, like, subscribe, and yes, please comment, ask some questions. In the meantime, I gotta go work on Mr. Freeze to show you that one.